When you think of scientific discovery, you probably picture pristine, sterile laboratories, right? Cautious experts meticulously adjusting microscopes in crisp white coats. Well, the reality? It's often incredibly chaotic. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the wild, totally unregulated history of bizarre scientific experiments. We're talking about real researchers who pushed the absolute boundaries of life, death, and human sanity, operating in an era where the rules were, quite literally, being written as they went along.
Let me ask you this right off the bat. Would you drink a glass of infectious bacteria just to prove a point? It sounds absolutely insane, doesn't it? But as you're going to see, the pursuit of scientific truth wasn't always a neat straight line. It was often driven by this fanatical, almost terrifying obsession. We are about to look at some of the most audacious figures in history, researchers who completely ignored the lines of safety just to uncover the mysteries of biology. For these pioneers, the line between absolute horror and monumental breakthrough was razor thin.
Chapter 1: Cheating Death and Souls, the Quest for Immortality.
You see, for centuries, the most brilliant minds weren't just trying to cure a cough. No, they were obsessed with trying to reverse death itself, or even mathematically measure the metaphysical. And that brings us to Giovanni Aldini in 1803 and this concept called galvanism. Aldini basically believed electricity was the fundamental vital force of life. So, to prove it, he managed to get his hands on the corpse of an executed murderer named George Forster. And in front of a completely horrified audience, Aldini applied electrodes to the dead man's face and body. The results? The jaw quivered, the face contorted, and one of his eyes popped wide open. It terrified the onlookers so much that one spectator reportedly died of shock later that very same day. Now, obviously, he didn't bring Forster back to life, but Aldini's chaotic little theater actually laid the very early foundation for modern cardiac defibrillation.
Fast forward a bit to the 1930s to a prodigy named Robert E. Cornish. He wanted to reverse clinical death through this incredibly grim multi-step process. Step 1, he systematically asphyxiated dogs. Step 2, he strapped their lifeless bodies to a highly specialized teeterboard and literally rocked them up and down to force blood circulation. At the exact same time for Step 3, he injected this intense cocktail of adrenaline, oxygen-saturated saline, and anticoagulants. And here is the truly shocking part. It worked. He actually resurrected 2 dogs, Lazarus IV and V. But there was a very dark consequence. The severe oxygen deprivation left those poor animals with permanent, catastrophic neurological damage. It was a terrifying dance right on the edge of life and death.
Around that same time, other researchers were heavily focused on the soul, specifically centering on a very specific mystery and a very specific number, 21.3 grams. Back in 1907, a physician named Dr. Duncan McDougall wanted to know, once and for all, if the human soul had physical weight. So, he placed terminally ill patients on an industrial-sized, highly sensitive scale. He claimed that at the exact moment of death, one patient's weight dropped by exactly 21.3 grams, which is about 3/4 of an ounce. Now, the science here was highly flawed. He completely ignored basic things like muscle relaxation and moisture evaporation, and his work was thoroughly rejected by the scientific community. But you know what? That didn't stop the cultural myth of the 21-gram soul from being permanently cemented in history.
Chapter 2: Playing God with Animals, Chimeras and Hybrids.
As we shift into the Cold War era, these experiments took a noticeably darker, much more political turn. Driven by a desire to prove ideological superiority, researchers started trying to artificially cross natural biological boundaries, attempting to create things like the human Z. In the 1920s, a world-renowned Soviet biologist named Ilya Ivanov was literally funded by the state to create a human-ape hybrid to try and prove evolutionary links. Ivanov traveled all the way to West Africa to artificially inseminate female chimpanzees with human sperm. And when that failed, he returned to the Soviet Union and actually found female human volunteers who were willing to be inseminated with ape sperm. It is a deeply unsettling quest. The only reason it didn't proceed was a twist of fate, the sudden death of his last orangutan and a massive shift in Stalin's political purges, which ended up sending Ivanov into exile.
Now, if Ivanov's work was unsettling, Vladimir Demikov's 1954 creation was just pure Gothic horror. He created a 2-headed dog. Demikov was a brilliant Soviet surgeon who surgically removed the lower body of a puppy and grafted its head, its neck, and its front legs right onto the neck of an adult German shepherd. He meticulously connected the blood vessels so the larger dog's heart pumped blood to both brains. And yes, both heads were fully conscious. The puppy head would even lap up milk, though it just kind of drained out of a tube from its severed esophagus.
Unsurprisingly, the Western press rightfully condemned the whole thing as grotesque, but listen to what Dr. Christian Barnard had to say. He was the man who performed the world's first successful human heart transplant, and he viewed him completely differently. He stated, "If there is a father of heart and lung transplantation, it is certainly Demikhov." And this brilliantly illustrates the really dark irony of this entire era. Demikhov's Frankenstein-like animal chimeras relied entirely on vascular suturing techniques that he invented, techniques that literally made modern life-saving human organ transplants possible.
Chapter 3. The Ultimate Guinea Pigs, the Art of Self-Experimentation.
So what do you do when ethical dilemmas or just sheer biology get in the way of your grand hypothesis? Well, you conduct experiments on the only subject you have total 100% control over, yourself. Back in 1896, American psychologist George Stratton really wanted to understand how the brain processes visual information. So he strapped on a pair of specialized goggles that permanently flipped his vision completely upside down, and he wore them for 8 days straight. As you'd expect, days 1 and 2 were an absolute nightmare of nausea and extreme disorientation. But by days 5 and 6, his motor skills actually improved as his brain started rapidly rewriting its sensory map. By day 8, that upside-down world felt completely normal to him. It was an incredibly brave experiment that brilliantly demonstrated the brain's massive neuroplasticity.
But of course, not all self-experimentation ends with a neat, elegant psychological discovery. In 1804, a medical student named Stubbins Ffirth was hell-bent on proving yellow fever wasn't contagious, and this led to a truly stomach-churning escalation. First, Ffirth literally slashed his own arms and poured fresh black vomit from dying patients right into his open wounds. When he didn't get sick from that, he stepped it up and dropped the vomit directly into his eyes. Finally, when that didn't work, he drank straight, undiluted black vomit. He never caught the fever, which led him to very confidently declare that he was right all along. And you know what the darkest, most ironic part of all this is? He was entirely wrong. Yellow fever is highly infectious, but it's transmitted by mosquito bites, not ingestion. So Ffirth's iron stomach was basically defending a completely flawed conclusion. Let's actually compare Ffirth's horrifying failure with an experiment that happened about 180 years later, because both of these men drank deeply hazardous biological fluids just to prove a point. Ffirth, as we know, was entirely wrong. But Barry Marshall, in 1984, drank a cloudy broth of bacteria and literally ended up winning the Nobel Prize. It really shows the massive disparity in outcomes for these extreme self-experimenters.
So, how exactly did Barry Marshall do it? Well, for decades, the absolute medical dogma was that stress and spicy foods were the cause of stomach ulcers. But Marshall believed that stomach ulcers were actually caused by H. pylori bacteria, not stress. So he took matters into his own hands. He underwent a baseline endoscopy, he cultured the bacteria directly from a sick patient, and he just drank it. Days later, he developed severe acute gastritis, proving definitively that the bacteria was the culprit. He cured himself with some simple antibiotics, utterly shattered decades of incorrect medical dogma, and quite literally saved millions of people from chronic pain and stomach cancer. Talk about a real game changer.
Which brings us to Chapter 4, The Evolution of Ethics, From Madness to Method. When we look back at these intense mini-narratives, they reveal a pretty stark duality in scientific history. Think about it. Aldini desecrated human remains, yet he laid the groundwork for defibrillation. Demikhov committed horrific acts of surgical chimerism on dogs, yet his work pioneered modern organ transplants. And Marshall risked serious self-infection, but he found the cure for ulcers. Somehow, this high-risk, unregulated chaos actually forged the monumental medical legacies that we depend on every single day. But obviously, we can't operate like that anymore. Because of the ethical nightmares we've just discussed, like Ivanov's human Z or Cornish's suffering dogs, the era of the rogue, mad scientist is firmly over. Today, scientists operate under very strict oversight. The establishment of institutional review boards, or IRBs, and international codes like the Declaration of Helsinki ensure that human and animal rights are rigorously protected. Science today is collaborative, it's peer-reviewed, and it is heavily regulated. Pure curiosity can just no longer be decoupled from ethics and safety.
Please like and subscribe.